Now, French President Emmanuel Macron has spoken with Vladimir Putin of Russia by phone. According to the Élysée Palace, their first direct exchange since September 2022 saw them discuss Iran and Ukraine. President Macron's office said the call lasted 2 hours, and the French leader called for a ceasefire in Ukraine and the start of negotiations on ending the conflict. President Putin blamed the West for the war. The statement from the Kremlin says the Russian president told the French president that any peace deal must be comprehensive and long-term and be based on new territorial realities. Berzina is Managing Director at the German Marshall Fund. She joins us from Riga. Welcome to DW. The first time the French and Russian presidents have spoken since 2022. Why do you think this is happening now?
There is a change in what is permissible and desirable in foreign policy at the moment. This is an outgrowth in many ways of what we've seen over the past 6 months since Donald Trump came into office in the United States. Having conversations and making bold moves is now completely acceptable and part of the political reality. It also comes after last week's Hague summit at NATO. This was a summit in which the question of what kind of threat is Russia was answered. Russia is a long-term threat for the alliance. So you have doctrine, an explanation of where the whole alliance stands. But then what do you do about it? How do you take the next steps is different. And there's also a push across the board to have Europe take greater responsibility for security on the European continent. And you could say that Macron, through this step, is interested in making a move on Europe's behalf, on France's behalf, to get to a ceasefire in Ukraine.
And so do we presume then that this was a European initiative headed by the French president rather than the President Macron freelancing, as it were?
I think it's hard to say how much of this is Macron on behalf of himself, France, or Europe. But it certainly will be seen from the Washington perspective as Europe deciding to make bold moves. Those distinctions about what is a unilateral action, what is a European action, and who in Europe is guiding that action don't feel quite so acute in Washington. And so there is, in many ways, a moment for entrepreneurship, even though that, of course, will ruffle feathers on the European side of the Atlantic.
As far as we can tell, they covered Ukraine and Iran. To any discernible effect?
Not to any discernible effect. The readouts that we have seen from the call really show Macron emphasizing what the Europeans have emphasized in France's position on Iran, which is diplomatic paths forward, and Putin saying what Putin has been saying since 2022, since 2021, and for longer. Vladimir Putin does not seem to make any ground over to the Europeans or to the West broadly on Ukraine, and he still holds the West responsible for there being a war in Ukraine. In fact, he said that it is the West's fault because they created a, quote, anti-Russian bridgehead in Ukraine. Now, that is a perspective that is not giving any ground or moving any steps further to ceasefire because he, Putin, is not seeking a ceasefire if he thinks that through this war, he is taking on Ukraine and all of the West, and he doesn't seem to want to stop.
Right. So I suppose the next question down that particular road then is, given that we never hear any variation in what Vladimir Putin wants or whom he blames for anything, is there any point in talking to him?
I don't think there's much point in continuing to talk to him. Perhaps you could say it's been 3 years since there was a conversation between Macron and Putin. Macron spent a lot of effort and time both talking to Putin to try to talk him out of the invasion, talking to him after the invasion, and it seemed to have no effect whatsoever. Perhaps it's worth checking 3 years later. Is it worth continuing? But this seemed not to have that kind of meaningful effect. Should that be continued then? In my opinion, not, because to continue to normalize Russia also on the international stage will have a cost. Being ostracized is something that Putin doesn't like. He likes being able to be on the phone with other world leaders, and especially if he doesn't have to give anything up and can simply say what he's always been saying again and feel like he's getting the attention and respect that he feels he deserves. And having a conversation is in many ways a show of respect.
It's a slightly depressing assessment, if you don't mind me saying, but thank you for guiding us through that. Kristine Berzina from the German Marshall Fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you.